Well, I'm gonna have to eat a little bit of crow because whoever it was that had lightning bolt in their Breya deck when I played and I scoffed at it, I thought about it. It germinated in the back of my mind. I realized they were probably onto something because lightning bolt solves two of the early game problems from the most prominent decks. It actually takes out Baral and it takes out Vial Smasher, and having that ability right there while still having a card that's useful against other people, as contrasted to something like perhaps a black removal, like for example, fatal contrast that to fatal push, which can be generally useless against a deck like mine, against a control deck. Um, but whereas lightning bolt can take out planeswalkers, so I think it actually probably does make sense. And since it's good against those two blue decks, it's kind of functioning like the red elemental blast slot, giving you a one mana answer to problems without actually being bad against, mono green, for example. So I think I was probably wrong about Bolt. We'll see, but I did test it today and it went pretty well, and it may end up actually staying. Um, the other thing I've done now is I took out Talaria West. It was a little too cutesy. I took out the balance. That interaction between all as foretold balance and balance was nice, but just not really consistent. Drawing balance feels bad. On the other hand, drawing ancestral visions always feels good. So the interaction between as foretold and ancestral vision should stay, I think. But I'm not going to run Talaria West to go get just ancestral vision or this little group of cards here. I have map to go get my lands, plus I of course have weathered wayfarer. So I think that instead I actually would rather have Badruka Bog, and it may change, but for now that's my feeling because Bog allows me to interact with things like Life from the Loam and Buried Alive effects pretty easily, especially if I do have to tutor for a map or whatever. But I also have the ability in against decks that want to build up massive graveyards and use them. For example, with big Yawgmoth Wills, or I had a game where somebody vials. I had a game where somebody had. I fought this long, protracted control battle against a Vial Smasher, and my opponent got something like 30 cards in his graveyard. He he plays cavern. He finally finds his cavern, so he gets Vial Smasher on the table with 2 blue up. And I'm like, okay, well, I play a card to deal with the board. Like, in fact, my hand was so good, I figure I had this game locked up because he's tapped out just to 2 blue, and I had like 6 cards in hand. So I make my initial play with like multiple counters, and he casts the Delve counter spell and deals 30 to me, unstoppable damage. Had I had Bojuka Bog in my deck, I either could have played it, on that turn if it were in my hand, for example, or tutored for it in response to the Vial Smasher, or even some point in the game maybe would have played it and quite possibly even picked it up with one of the bounce lands and replayed it. So it really wouldn't have been a lethal situation, and then I would have been able to take over that game. So after that, I decided between that and Reanimator and Loam, I finally decided to go ahead and just put Bog in here. And what's neat about Bog too is not only can you recur it with the pickup lands, but you can also Armageddon it away and replay it with your Crucible Worlds if you want to. So in recognition of how many Vial Smashers there are out there, I am still running. Not only I have the Bolt in the deck now, I'm also running the Shackles. I don't remember if that was the case, but along those lines, I swapped out my Disenchant slot and I put in Anguish Unmaking. So I think that despite the fact that Anguish Unmaking deals damage against that deck, because it gives you so much flexibility and is good against essentially everyone, where sometimes Disenchant is just mostly useless. Exiling a card from your opponent's library and getting a few life when they're like White Weenie is not that impressive. So anyway, Anguish Unmaking, though, just general flexibility, strong card, gives me a way to start a counter war against somebody. I think it probably makes the cut. So it's just, I know that classically, going back in time, if you would have given me the option to play a card like Anguish Unmaking or Disenchant, it would have been a no-brainer Anguish Unmaking slam into my deck. So I think maybe I need to listen to that kind of historical wisdom and then just run the Anguish. And the nice thing about that is it'll also, just like the Disenchant, it's a split card that'll tuck or that'll exile a card from your opponent's library. Anguish Unmaking or tuck one of their permanents to the bottom of their deck. their artifacts or enchantments. Anguish Making also can address cards like Keranos, the God, or other indestructible effects. So I think having that flexibility is probably worthwhile. No other real significant changes. Oh, yeah, well, that's not entirely true. I actually put Tezzeret, my old friend, back in um, just because I felt like what I wanted was, so I had tested, I've tried Parallax Wave and I tried Balance and I tried a whole bunch of other things because I was trying to get my fourth Armageddon effect or Winter Orb effect. Like I wanted a fourth way to pinch my opponent's mana. Well, just by putting Tezzeret back in the deck, poof, I suddenly have a fourth Winter Orb virtually. Since playing Tezzeret means I can just go get Orb immediately and lock my opponent down. But since I'm also running Map, Tezzeret, Map, Crucible, that's his 4 counters, that makes that much stronger. I have Shackles back in the deck as a target for him. And so with all that stuff going on, he's a lot stronger. Plus, I'm also running Moxen. So when I took Tezzeret out, I don't think I had the full suite of Moxes. And he's much stronger when you can activate him for 0 and start fetching out 0 casting cost artifacts to get ahead on the board. So you do them for 2, get an orb, and then you do them for 0 for Mox, Opal preferably, or whichever, and then you take it from there. So I think he probably makes it back in. I do still have Counterflux in the deck. I also added Misdirection to the deck. So I still have good counters, but I'm not running the early cheap ones that tend to get worse as the game goes on. Instead, I'm running a little bit higher end, but more sophisticated counters, I think, and probably more general utility over the course of any given game. So let's take a look at some Magic. Hopefully you stuck around for all that and I didn't bore you too much with my deck techs discussion, but I kind of like to let you know why, what changes I've made and why I've made them. So here I am playing against Wizardry running Nissa, and he goes first. He has to mulligan, but he crop rotations into Ancient Tomb on turn 1. I get first turn Jeweled Amulet. He gets turn 2 Nissa for Forest, of course. I charge the Amulet. But I have turn 2 As Foretold, which is just such a house. This card is just so insanely good. So if he doesn't kill it here, I'm in great shape. Instead, he Explosive Vegetations, which, is not too good for me. And I draw a Mana Leak, which is very excellent timing there. So he goes for End of the North, and because he has Nissa, I hate to have to do this, but his commander kind of forces me to Stoic Rebuttal here, and he plays Temple of the False Gods. If I hadn't Stoic Rebuttaled there, I was in big trouble. So using As Foretold mana at the end of his turn, I Enlightened Tutor I Mystical Tutor for Armageddon. So now I'm just sitting on As Foretold as it ticks up, and I have a Mana Leak in hand. My opponent has 2 more natural land drops and tries to play Green Sun Zenith for 1, which I leak. On my turn, I'm able to cast Breya for 0, thanks to As Foretold. Now, if you're not familiar with how this works, As Foretold will pay for your commander's cost, whatever his casting cost is, his or her, but it will not pay for the commander tax, so you still need mana for that. My opponent is, strangely enough, running Urborg. I guess I understand why, because he's probably running Eye of Ujin, but it's super helpful for me here, because it's the only black I have. Although, actually, my mana problems are effectively over due to As Foretold. I've played a free Vedalken Shackles and stolen Nissa and then picked up an island. I'm now holding, Forbid and 2 counters. Forbid costs 0. I cast it with As Foretold and just buy it back with 2 islands, no cost to myself whatsoever. My opponent's at 8, and that's it. He's done for. So As Foretold is just, that card is just so utterly insane. I absolutely love it. It's so much fun to play with. I'm going to try really hard to remember to hit the minimize button this time. I say that every time, but boy. All right, so round 2. I will say this. I got fairly lucky with the number of mulligans my opponents were taking today. So, but, it's always good if you can capitalize on your opponent's bad luck. So here I am playing against Grenzo, and I go first with a first turn Mox Talisman pass, throwing away the Bog. Hey, if I need it later, maybe we can get the Crucible, but otherwise I'm not super worried about it. I want to hit my tempo, and I top deck a land, which was fantastic, because that means turn 2 Breya is coming down, going first. That's a pretty rough position for my opponent to be in, but he has Flame Slash, so he kills Breya. I get a Jeweled Amulet, the ready. Decide I'm going to attack for 2, make a creature, and charge my amulet is the plan. I, I, I figure if he wants to spend 3 mana to take a counter off of the ready, that is perfectly fine with me. That's his entire turn. Alright, so I just plus it up again, hit him for damage, play a land, and I recast Breya, I believe. Yep, down it comes. Alright, so now I've just got an army, an ever-growing army here. My opponent finally decides to play his commander, and I just Doretti it off the board. He activates it in response. Nothing useful happens for him. I send in all of the team but 1 flyer, and here comes Tezzeret back to the party, having that extra Winter Orb here. It's not that I was losing, but Tezzeret says, game over, I win. And I like that. 5 mana, I win sounds good to me. 5 is about the limit of what I want to pay for an I win card, but 6 I think is unreasonable, especially in a deck that's trying to pinch lands. But boy, Tezzeret is certainly good at ending games. Alright, so here's another game where I'm playing against Sidisi, and I've got a Mox draw, a double Mox, but I don't have actually I don't have a single card that does anything other than make mana. So yet again, I get first turn Talisman, and I top deck Tezzeret again. So I think you see where this game is going. Turn 2, Breya going first. It's just so insanely brutal. The Moxes are extra good in this deck. Opponent hymns me and misses Tezzeret. Smash face. Down comes, again, Tezzeret here to end games. And clink, a Winter Orb for my opponent. Even though it locks more of my lands down than it does his, my opponent's like in so much bad shape right now. And now I get to start Tezzeretting for 0. A Vindicate, an untapped Swamp, smash for 6 more. This is just all about tempo now. I'm not really trying to get control of the game. I'm just trying to maintain pressure. Top deck a Gush, which is phenomenal right there. And a land tax and a counterspell. So I just killed Tezzeret. I'm good. He's done his job. Go get Scroll Rack. Put back a basic land in the other land that I drew. My opponent has more land than me now, and I draw As Foretold. So I decide I'm not going to leave up a counter. I'm gonna As Foretold down here, because that means that even if my opponent finds a solution here, I'm 100% unlocked to win this game. So I now have Tax Rack running under Winter Orb with an As Foretold. Not even counting my commander, that series that I just described is a completely lethal series for a mono black player. But this guy, I mean, he had a terrible mulligan in the beginning. Anyway, I decided not to As Foretold the Weathered Wayfarer into play. Instead, I use As Foretold on Ponder. And the only thing I'm really doing is just looking to see if there was any way that I can make sacking my Breya, or excuse me, sacking my 2 counter flyers to kill him, if there's any way I could make it more safe. Not because I felt threatened by whatever he could do with 1 card and 2 black, but simply because it's the right play, and you might as well take precautions if you're able to. There's literally 0 cost to doing so. All right, so game 4. So I don't believe my opponent mulligans to death, and I get an insane attack draw on this one. So this is a very long game, and hopefully it doesn't bug out. Anyway, here I am playing against Nissa again. So it's weird patterns, but I have a really good opening hand. Somehow when I use my fetch land, it flashes Emrakul to me, but I have no idea why. So I Confidant for turn 2. I Vamp for turn 2 Confidant. Find myself a Winter Orb off him, so I go Talisman Orb. Even though, again, my opponent has, Ancient Tomb, and it's going to hurt more of my lands than his. I actually thought he was going to Swords the Nissa, but when he plays Arbor Elf, that becomes the new target, and I'm able to play a bounce land here. I could have gone land Felwar, but I'd rather get I can do Felwar next turn. I'd rather get the Boilerworks untapped and on the board. So I can use it to cast Felwar, for example. So I find myself a Notion Thief and a Mystical Teachings, and then my opponent plays the Nissa that untaps 4 lands per turn and uses it to get a Thragtusk out. This is not good at all. So anyway, I end of turn Notion Thief, hit Armageddon, so I'm down to 14 life now, cast Breya and pass. opponent gets to untap basically his whole board, thanks to Nissa. And then plays Fierce Empath. I figured he'd go get Primetime, but he goes and gets Woodland Bellower there. So I wait to see what I'm going to draw first, and then I go ahead and Mystical Tutor for a Cryptic. And for some reason, not realizing, probably because it's almost never true, but not realizing that Fellwar Stone doesn't actually tap for blue right now. So I was planning to Cryptic here, but since I can't do that, we'll go with Stoic Rebuttal. I have 2 mana floating, and my opponent plays Beast Within on the orb. So I go ahead and use that mana to sack the orb and a flyer and deal 3 to Nissa so that my other flyer can just fly over and finish it off. So I drew Misdirection, took another 5 damage from Dark Confidant, and decided that, you know what, now's the time to Armageddon because his Nissa is about to flip for one thing, and I can Cryptic Command and do his Thragtusk back to his hand. Of course, that means I won't be able to do anything like that for my Dark Confidant, but that's okay. So I start sending in with Breya and leaving back blockers, and I'm fairly certain my opponent doesn't want to attack here because he's waiting for a Dark Confidant to kill me. All right, so I'm able to preordain. I find a Jeweled Amulet off Confidant this time though, and I go ahead and sack Confidant and a Amulet and a flyer so that I can kill his Thragtusk token. And then I go ahead and preordain and set a land on top. So I stack my effects, so Confidant resolves first, so I get the land, and then land tax resolves because he actually played a land here. There's only one other land because the land I put on top was the basic land. But as you can see, here I have a Gush, and I have 2 islands, 1 in play, 1 in hand. So I'm just gonna get that island on the board and then put it right back into my hand. Okay, Confidant hits a land here. I'm at 7 life, however, from the last turn. Tezzeret had gotten an Opal, and I revealed a Watery Grave here, so Tezzeret goes and gets a Mox Diamond this time. And then I Treachery Nissa, play a Dak Faden, because I'm holding Gush, Daze, and Misdirection. On my turn, Confidant reveals Doretti. And I use Dak Faden. I have Notion Thief in play, remember, so I used Dak Faden on my opponent. I had done so last turn as well, drawing 2 extra cards and taking out his Duplicant and Forest, as a matter of fact. And finally, I go ahead and just cast Doretti, sacrifice Trivial Artifact, Fellwar Stone in this case since it's not making blue, and kill his only creature. Is that right? No, I'm sorry. I cast Vedalken Shackles and steal his Fierce Empath. And so at the end of this whole mess, I have control of both of my opponent's creatures. My opponent's at 0 life. I'm at 4 from Dark Confidant, but I never actually... So, of course, I could have gained life off of Breya at any time. I could have killed my Confidant at any time, but I never had to. So I was actually kind of curious as I played that one to find out, would I actually have to do something? But at 4, so I knew at 7 I couldn't be killed by the Dark Confidant because the most I could take was 5, and I'd already seen 2 of my 5 drops, so I wasn't super, concerned with it. All right, so that was the mono green. Yeah, so we're on the last one. But if I hadn't been able to win that turn, then I was certainly going to activate Breya and get it back into the safe zone. And finally, in the finals, Vile Smasher. My opponent goes first. I don't have a crazy draw. I didn't have to mulligan, but he did get to Gitaxian Probe me, so now he knows what's coming. I use my fetch land. In response, he uses his, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, please don't stifle me. Luckily, he didn't, so I get Expedition Map out. Big deal against this deck, usually. He gets a Chrome Mox and decides to play Vile Smasher, and I rip Swords of Plowshares off the top, and then I bog away his graveyard. I pass for the turn. That Swords of Plowshares was so timely. I think this game was almost 100% over if I hadn't drawn something along those lines. Alright, so I played a land at the end of my opponent's turn. My opponent, Mystical Teachings for Force of Will, and then ponders. I have Bog and I have Map, so I can actually pick up the Bog and deal with his... I can use a pickup land to get rid of his Mystical Teachings. and produce extra mana, but I decide to go a little more aggressive, and I go and fetch a Cavern of Souls. He's down to only 4 cards in hand. I know one's a Force of Will, so if I play Breya here, he can't force it, but he has Pyroblast, which cannot counter it because of Cavern of Souls, but he can destroy it, so I get 2 Thopters, but that's it, and then he has Painful Truths. Ouch. Into Dark Confidant. It's so bad for me. But I decide, okay, well, the way to deal with my opponent having too many cards, as always, is Winter Orb, so I slam that into play, hit him for damage, and pass. Now, Dark Confidant, I'm actually going to try. I'm going to bank on the fact that his deck, unlike mine, doesn't really have any access to life gain, and so he may not be able to deal with the damage Dark Confidant deals. And I draw Lightning Bolt here, and go ahead and try to bullet the Confidant, and he lapses, which is great for me. I got a card plus I got him to tap some mana, and on his turn he takes 3 more for Toxic Deluge that he draws from Dark Confidant. So this is excellent. So I send in with the flyers. Opponent's out 15. He reveals Misdirection, dropping to 10. He's got uncracked fetches, 2 of them in play, and he's also holding a Steam Vents, and I know this because Dark Confidant's revealed it. So he actually goes Toxic Deluge for 4, plays an untapped land, and drops himself down to 7 life. So I go ahead and bolt him. So he's at 4, and he's got 2 sack lands. It's almost like I'm the one playing Vile Smasher right now. So on my, nothing happens for the previous turn. Then on my next turn, I go ahead and Demonic Tutor. And I'm kind of waiting to see what he does. He doesn't do anything about it, so I go ahead and Dimir Aqueduct up the Bojuka Bog. He's got 8 cards in graveyard, and I really don't want it to get... I don't want him to get into the ability to delve anything. Plus, I do need an Aqueduct to work under the orb, so that was why I went that route. So finally, my opponent, he impulsed, but didn't do much else. Finally, he decides to make a play. He goes for Jace. I attempt to counter. I know that I'm going to lose this. I just wasn't sure how. My opponent misdirects the counter spell using Flash of Insight. So the Bojuka Bog pickup was actually pretty useful. He then pluses Jace, and I go ahead and Enlighten Tutor after that. Resolves for a Grim Monolith, which I slam into play and say go. And the reason I have Grim is because I'm holding Yogg Will, and I'm just about able to will into Lightning Bolt and win. But I do need a counter spell. Then I draw a Notion Thief. I could actually Notion Thief in response to Jace, but again, he's holding Force of Will. My opponent cracks a fetch. He's now at 3 though. And then duresses me. I have to let him take the will because it just doesn't make... And I also have to let him Jace because I wait a turn, I get to untap Cavern of Souls. Now I can Notion Thief in response to Jace. The problem is I'm confident that he is going to kill my Notion Thief if I make that play. So I wait one more turn and I go for Uncounterable Breya with 1 mana floating and 1 mana untapped. And in response, because he's at 3... And I figure you can't counter the Breya. So this hits. I've got 2 artifacts in play. So even if he has removal for the Breya in response to the flyers coming out, I'm just going to tap my Tundra and deal 3 to him and just win. And my opponent responds by doing this. He's Tainted Pacting all the way down to Stifle. He can't stifle the Thopters and win because I have 2 artifacts. So I go ahead and spend the mana anyway, realizing that I'm in trouble mana-wise, and I sack my Winter Orb and my Grim Monolith. And my opponent stifles, of course, so he doesn't lose. On my turn, I use my... and then he... on his turn, he actually kills one of the flyers by bouncing it with Jace. So on my turn, I go ahead and attack my opponent and take him down to 2. So on the next turn, now he's hitting me. He control magics my Breya, and he hits me with it the turn after. So I try an end of turn Mystical Teachings. He tries to Condescend it. I try to remand the Mystical Teachings back to my hand, and he Flusterstorms. But I'm getting cards out of his hand. He's down to 4 cards in hand, and I know he's still holding Force of Will. But that counter war tapped him low enough that when he hard casts Force of Will here, I'm able to evasive action and push Vedalken Shackles down. Along with the fetch land, which can go get a Volcanic, that'll put me at 4 islands exactly to try to take my Breya back. Now, I assume he will sack Chrome Mox here and the Breya so that I don't get it and he doesn't lose. He's used another fetch, so he's down to 1. No more fetches for him. But then if he does sack the Breya and the Chrome Mox in response to the Shackles, I'm just going to replay an uncounterable Breya off Cavern of Souls, and he is at 1 after all. Well, instead of things going down the way I expected, what he actually does is Cryptic Command the Shackles back to my hand before I can take Breya, and I get punched in the face for 4 more by my own commander. On my turn, I drew Vedalken Shackles, so I cast, or Vindicate, so I cast Vedalken Shackles. It resolves without a fight, so I attempt to Vindicate Jace, simply because I don't have the mana to Notion Thief Jace. And that sticks too, so I wait for combat on the next turn and attempt to steal Breya. In response, my opponent Snapcasters, Tainted Pacts. He's down to almost no cards in library now. 15, 14. 14 cards in library. But he Tainted Pacts or Dak Faden, uses Dak to steal the Shackles, not realizing that he is not going to get Breya back until like I still control Breya from the Shackles until he untaps. And then he plays Liliana, and instead of killing Breya, he pluses it up. For my turn, I draw a Gush, and I'm able to Gush and attempt to Mystical Teachings with Flashback because I could just win the game right now. My opponent's last card in hand is Terminate from my Breya. So instead, I let Teachings fetch me an Anguished Unmaking. Because you see, my opponent's at 50 seconds on the clock, and I'm at 3 minutes. And it may come down to time. In fact, it's looking very reasonable that it'll come down to time. So he goes for his commander, and during combat, I go ahead and Anguished Unmaking his commander. It was a matter of taking 4 or 3, but 3 is better than 4, plus it gets it off the board. So on my turn, I go ahead and Armageddon, and then sweep away all of his creatures. And he's now down to 10 seconds versus my 2 minutes. So he decides he doesn't even have time to untap Shackles or activate either of his Planeswalkers. He's just hoping. He's only got 6 cards in his library anyway, so I don't know exactly how he wins this game. Even Liliana's Ultimate or Dax, neither of which would do anything. Because he's not using Liliana, I'm able to actually cast As Foretold and start. I play a Weathered Wayfarer who can potentially attack here, and it was right on the turn when my opponent would have been able to ultimate Lily. So he has to minus Lily in order to kill it because he's at 1. And with 4 cards in his library and 0 seconds on the clock at 1 life, my opponent finally kicks the bucket. But I thought that was kind of just a really crazy. Obviously, like at some point, As Foretold is going to tick up enough to 4, and then I'm going to cast Breya with the as long as I have enough mana to pay the tax on the commander, and then the game ends anyway, or my opponent gets decked first since he only has 4 cards, or he runs out of time, or I find some other way to deal 1. So it was like he was losing on every front except the board. He actually had probably a better board than me, although As Foretold is pretty darn good. But yeah, he had a better board than me. The funny thing is if I have As Foretold out and my opponent ultimates Liliana, and they put As Foretold in one pile and everything in the other pile, I just take As Foretold because I'm going to be able to cast cards on my turn, my opponent's turn, don't care. Pretty much that one card will run like the entire deck unless they can get rid of it. So, and I believe I had already seen my opponent exile both Red Blast and Pyroblast. Yes, I had. So I knew that As Foretold was not going away. So anyway, even Liliana's Ultimate was not going to be a problem. So I hope you enjoyed that game. I hope you enjoyed all of them. There's certainly interesting, different kind of feel to the way it plays out with this configuration. But I feel like I like it. It seems to be. It kind of like. It feels a little more like consistently rude. You're not with too many of the early counters. I would get to a point in a game where I would have a handful of conditional or situational counters. I think in one of my videos you saw me actually cast like 3 counters to try and stop something. Like I did Evasive Action, Mana Leak, and Spells Pierce to get my opponent to finally tap enough mana to counter something, and then I lost the counter war anyway. So I don't know. I like Evasive Action and Leak because they're just very strong, and it's quite hard to have 3 or 4 mana left over. But the rest of them, well, maybe an extra Tezzeret's better, maybe a misdirection's better, and so on and so forth. Misdirection is probably the one I have the biggest question mark on, but it seems good in theory. It's never really come up. So, all right, well, that's all I've got. I hope you enjoyed watching. That was there's my boy splashing around in the tub a couple years ago. I hope you enjoyed watching this. I think this was win number 11 or something. Yeah, 11. I'm not sure how many more I may or may not get because my wife and I are going to take our son to go do fun things. We're going to the Highlander games this weekend, so I may not have time to play. But stay tuned, and I will try to continue to produce content as much as I can for you all. That's it. Thanks very much for watching. I'll see you next time.